We'll try to move on to something more important in the subsequent interactions. Now, can somebody quickly sum up what all we have discussed so far as the international, human resource management is concerned? Can you give me some basic inputs what we have done so far? Yes. So we have basically talked about the differences which exist between the domestic and the international human resource management, and some of the functions. Like we were talking about uh, the advantages and disadvantages of hiring uh, people from the home country of the multinational, or people from the host country where the subsidiary is located, and the hiring people from the third countries. So these are some of the choices which exist before you know the managers. Uh, Recalling from my experience, right? Uh, what I have seen in the Dhofar University, which had people from something like around 17 or 18 nationalities. The top positions were obviously the vice chancellor we had. He was an Omani person. He was a local person, and he was Dr. Hassan Kashoub. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for, and even the deputy vice chancellor, or the dean for academic affairs and the dean for administration and registration, they were all Arabic speaking people. Either they were from Tunisia, or they were Omanis itself, or they were people from say Syria. So there was actually, I mean, this is very much justified, because at all these positions, most of the communication with the Ministry of Higher Education takes place, and you need to have someone who can communicate both orally as well as in written form in the language that was Arabic. For rest of the positions, there were people from all sorts of nationalities. We had an Indian dean for the College of Engineering. We had an Indian dean for the College of Commerce and Business Administration, and so on. And then for the academic positions, they were, I mean, it was something which was open, and people from all sorts of nationalities, they were occupying the positions of professors, associate professors, and assistant professors. And below that, the office staff, the office secretaries, or other, I mean, these were the positions which were exclusively filled by the Omani people. Uh, and again, that was kind of act as an element of control, as well as it goes on to fulfill the requirements of Omanization, filling up a certain minimum number of seats with Omani people. And then below that, I mean, for some people like office boys or PNs and all, we had people from India, we had people from Bangladesh as well. So that's how the things work. And there's, I mean, for each of the positions, whether the top positions, for the middle level positions, and for the basic positions, uh, you'll find that there is a logic, there's a rationale behind choosing people from the home country, from the host country, and as well as from the third party, I mean, or you may call them as the expatriates. So there is a, now if you talk about the mm, the third category that we were discussing, rationale for employing third country nationals. Now, this is actually this expands the opportunity set or the choice set for the recruiters. Their people are more career oriented. They are the people who are qualified, and they want to work abroad. They have aspirations to work abroad. And yes, hiring people from the third countries is less expensive to maintain than the home country nationals. And obviously, these people have the willingness to work away from home. But yes, there are sometimes cultural issues related to, sensitivity or hostility with respect to the nationals of the specific countries. I mean, some people belonging to certain nationalities, they are often considered to be somewhat more, I would say, on the hostile side. I don't want to generalize this, but maybe because of some reasons, we'll find that people from, say, Egypt or people from Syria, they were considered to be somewhat more sensitive. So that's how the rationale goes. Moving ahead, we have already talked about it. It's just like a kind of a recap of what we have discussed so far. That the basic selection criteria for international assignments, a major chunk hovers around the cultural issues, and it's all about adaptability, how a person can mold himself or herself as per the culture of the place where he or she is designated to work. So it involves ability to integrate with different people, culture, types of different business organizations, and ability to problem solving is common, sensitivity to differences in cultures, politics, religion, and ethics. Like, for example, when you are abroad, it is a very, very common advice that do not involve yourselves into any activities which might be considered as which might be considered with a bit of suspicion in these countries. Especially, I mean, in most of the Arab countries, their police is very, very strong, and their information system is very, very strong. And so it's important that one should keep oneself isolated from any kind of political activities, and any other types of affiliations which might be considered suspicious by the local people and the police. So some of the other attributes which are looked into the right candidates who are being considered for international assignments, and they should be more independent and fairly flexible in decision making. They should be of good physical and emotional health. That's very, very important. Especially physical health is important because the assignments overseas are very, very demanding, and they take its toll on both emotional as well as physical health. So one should be very physically fit, and obviously age, experience, education, language training, right? And also it's important, especially in some cases, the family status is given. The people who are assigned a job abroad, they can they are allowed to bring their family with them. But in many cases, especially for, if I talk about the the blue collared people or the labor class, the the nature of job does not you know allow the family status, and so the family stays in the home country, while the people or the labor, they're working in a foreign country. So these are some of the issues. And obviously, especially when somebody gets separated from the family, you're staying away from your own country, so it has its you know obviously its effects or side effects, I would say, on the working of a person. So all these things are considered very important. So, in fact, I was when I was reading through some of your assignments and the case study related to the McDonald's. So, in fact, the case is opens up, and the introductory part deals with the training program that McDonald's has for the development of the people who are working in McDonald's. Please mute your mic. So, uh, what we see that it's important for most of the uh, you know international companies to invest a lot in the training programs, whether it is the skill training, on-job training, cultural training, language training, or technical upgradation training. So that's all. They are very very important. Already in case of McDonald's, we have seen that for different kind of nationalities or for the subsidiaries located in different countries, McDonald's have some kind of tailor-made training programs for the people who are working at McDonald's restaurants. And similarly, as you can see, even in case of Ford training programs, they are all centrally, designed, and then they are ultimately, uh, transferred, or you may say they are delivered to the subsidiaries which are located in the different countries. And in case of as we see, in case of Ford, it is a centralized program, so it is more, you can call this as ethnocentric approach. But in organizations like McDonald's, although it is a global company, but it is more polycentric in its approach towards training, because it considers each market or each country as different, and accordingly it tries to impart training based on the specific needs of the that particular market. Another important aspect of human resource management is the salary or the compensation. As we all understand that we all work for money, we all work for salary, right? So, and that's perhaps one reason why people switch one job. They switch between jobs, and they, for higher salaries, sometimes for better designations, sometimes for better challenging jobs, right? So when we talk when we talk about the international assignments, there are certain things which must be taken care of, because uh, you know, they are going abroad, they are going into a different country, and each country has, they have a different structure of economy. They have specific, what you call as price levels. That's also very very important. So that's why, in fact, you see here, a very important thing is that an international compensation program must be designed to equalize the purchasing power of employees at comparable position levels living overseas and in the home country. So the essence is that whether you are posted in home country, whether you are posted abroad, your purchasing power should be at, par. It should be equalized. You should be, there should be some kind of parity or equilibrium between your purchasing power, right? And that's why there are certain incentives and certain extra benefits which are given to, nullify that disparities which might exist, if any. Like, for example, generally people go abroad for the benefit of, tax free salaries. And that was the advantage that we have especially when we are going to the Middle Eastern countries, where the tax you get a tax-free salary, and moreover, when you are repatriating that salary into your NRA account, so even for the period that you are abroad, and it should be obviously more than 6 months. So if you fall into that category of being an NRI, so your foreign salary is exempted from taxes. But in some countries, the taxes are there, and for that matter, income tax uh, component should be, uh, incorporated. It should be accommodated in such a way that the salary should be designed in such a way that it should be able to take care of the tax that you are paying. Like for example, if you're working in Malaysia, so no matter what, you have to pay the income tax. Is despite the fact that you are an expatriate. So for that matter, you'll have to, the salary should be such that it will take care of that. The taxes, housing allowances. Obviously, that's very well. Sometimes the some of the institutions are such, or jobs are such, that they provide you with a, instead of giving a housing allowance, they give you the housing facilities. They have their own housing complexes, they have their own full residential complexes, maybe with a school and with a playground and a shopping center. But that obviously goes for some of the very very uh, you know well off and well established organizations. Allowances. Please switch off your mics. Those of you, I mean, there is some kind of disturbance. Try to do away with that. Okay. Then, as we were talking about, to adjust the difference between home and the expenses, the cost differences between the home market and the markets abroad. So some kind of additional allowances is to be paid for, in order to offset those differences. Contribution to savings pensions, like for example, uh, you may get gratuity for each year of service. So that is something that you will get once you leave the job, or once you are repatriated. So some elements are there which may which becomes your saving, or which you get towards the end of your job as a lump sum, right? Relocation allowances, again, in some of the organizations, they do provide for when you are moving into a country, they will allow you one time furniture allowance and other types of allowances, so that you can furnish your home. And subsequently, when you are leaving the job and when you are going back to your own country, so they do provide for limited amount of shipping expenses, so that you can, whatever things that you have over a period of time, you have kind of purchased, and if you want to take them along, so you can, that expenses are borne by the company. Education allowances there, obviously, for the children. And then you also have the healthcare allowances. You generally, nowadays, a very common thing is that you get your say the healthcare card that is there. You also, and you are also, it's some kind of a health insurance card, and it's like almost cashless uh, program that you have. And that obviously depends on your grade or position, and you are that health insurance card, it you get entitled to some of the hospitals, or sometimes to all the hospitals in that entire country. And even while you are traveling abroad, you are covered, right? So that's very very important. Now moving further to the one topic, that is about the performance appraisal. Now, let me just ask you a very simple question. What exactly do you understand by performance appraisal?
Sir, appraisal on the basis of performance.
Okay, good. So why is it needed? What is the rationale behind performance appraisal?
Sir, to increase the morale of other employees so that they can perform better.
Okay, good. What else? This is one aspect. Well taken.
Sir,
What
if
other
any
things?
employee is lacking any skill, the manager can educate him about
Okay.
that skill, and it also help in giving promotion on the basis of performance.
Yes, very, very important. We're talking about the right thing, that is promotion. Promotion is important. It is about the assessment. Actually, it is basically carried out to find out that gap between the desired performance and actual performance. What is expected of you and what you are doing, and very rightly for the sake of promotions. That is important. Another thing, another very important decision is whether to retain this person or to fire the person, right? You're working, you're not performing to up to the expectations, so maybe you may you may be asked to leave. That would be obviously very harsh. Sometimes in the first year, when people are, they are uh, in the job, so the first year is considered to be a lenient year. And if you are not working well, so you are given another chance, and you may be, left with a some kind of a letter of caution, or some kind of a warning letter, that in this particular year you have not performed well, right? Now let me just recall, right? One is promotion, other is retention at the same level, another is the firing, or the what you may call as retrenchment. And then a very important thing that we have already highlighted is to know the gap between the performance gap, you can say, what is expected and what is the actual performance. Maybe this would be used for the purpose of training, because once you know what is the performance level and what is expected, so then you will also know that what kind of skills are needed, what kind of training is needed to be imparted to the people who are working, to the workforce, and that will help the entire thing. Now let me again, before I give you an example, let me ask you, what are the different methods of performance appraisal you are aware of? Okay, okay. What is management by objectives? Yes. Or okay, let's talk about more important thing, that is the 360-degree performance appraisal. What is this all about? Yes.
So it's a feedback from several people from the organization.
Okay, good. Like,
So like taking the collective ideas from the peer groups or the working professionals which are working with their individual.
okay, okay. The feedback from the peer group, fine. That's one thing. What else? Okay, very good. Very true. So it is a, you will say it is a very complete or holistic kind of an appraisal. And the feedback is taken from all the stakeholders, right? All the people who are involved or who are being affected by the performance of that person, right? So now here I will give you the example from the Dhofar University. That's how I compare working here in Aligarh. Uh, I never got to know that what exactly performance appraisal is. Every year, maybe the chairperson is sending a confidential report. That's what we call as CR, right? And only if you make a deliberate effort, so you might get to see what kind of remarks have been mentioned in your case. But if you don't want, when you'll never come to know about that, right? And the only thing is, wow, another that is the time, the only time when you actually get to write something about yourself or what you have done is at the time when you are moving from probation into the confirmation of your job, right? Now moving from this system, when I went to Dhofar University, they had a very you know I would say a very robust system of performance appraisal. Every year, a form was circulated that was called as a self-assessment report of around 14 to 15 pages, which each employee, I'm talking about the academic positions, we were required to fill in that what exactly have we done in the last 1 year. And there were three important parameters. One was the academic performance, that is the teaching. What we have done in case of teaching, what innovations, what new things we have taught, what new approaches we have adopted in the teaching. The second important parameter was the community service. How we were using our position as teachers to do good to the general society, the community at large. Any kind of programs, whether it is plantation of trees, whether it is about, say, blood donation camps, or whether it is education awareness programs, or whether it is some kind of a consultancy to the industry, right? So what we were contributing, number one, in terms of teaching, number two, in terms of community service, and number three was the research. So these were the three parameters. Now, in terms of research, what all conferences you have attended, again, and what the number of papers in reputed journals, or any other research work, like, say, being on the reviewing panel of some of the reputed journals, right? Or being some kind of expert, being invited as an expert by some other academic institutions. So we had these three sections. We had to fill up everything. This was the self-assessment report. This was ratified by the immediate head, or the what you may call as the chairman or head of the department. Then there was two peers or two colleagues of yours who would submit their report about you, what they feel about you in terms of cooperation, in terms of your behavior, in terms of your attitude, in terms of your academic temperament. And I mean, there was a whole list, and they were supposed to rate their colleagues on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 being very high, I mean excellent, and 1 is poor. Then there were reports from the students. There was a student's feedback which was there, and they will tell about everything. I mean, how you are engaging the class, whether you are polite with them, whether you are, receptive to them, whether you are answering the questions, whether you are available, right? Whether you are approachable. And I mean, again, that there was a big list, and the students were required to give their feedback. So, and all the the claims which one person is making in the self-assessment report, they have to be supported with documents, they have to be supported with evidence, and then you submit it in the office of the head of the department. And finally, one fine day, you get a call from the dean, and there you have a meeting. The dean is there, the chairman is there, and you are the third person. You are the person who's being interviewed, and your entire report is there with them, and they will ask questions, they will seek clarifications, and if they think that you are good enough, maybe you will get some kind of a salary increment. If they think that you are just as per what was desired, so you continue, and you get a contract renewal. And if they think that your performance has been consistently bad, maybe for the last 2 years or 3 years, so they may even say goodbye, right? So that was the kind of a system, a very, very complete and a very, very transparent system which existed. Nothing confidential, nothing put into the envelopes and sealed envelopes like that. So that was really a very, very interesting part, and something which I learned from there. And as far as the promotions were concerned, they were very, very difficult. Now here in Aligarh, every time you need to get promoted, or you become eligible for the next higher academic post, so you apply through the office, and you fill up a form, and then you appear for that 5-10 minutes interview in the selection committee, and this is where they decide whether you get promoted or not. But there it was a very different system, that for once you get eligible in terms of the number of years that you have put into a particular at a particular academic position, so you again prepare a full dossier of your achievements, and it should be both the soft copy as well as the hard copy, and you submit that application to the dean's office. Once it is received, it is first verified at the college level, right? And then it goes to the university level, and once it is cleared at the university level, then your papers which you have written, your research papers and other accomplishments that you have you're claiming, so they are sent to the experts who are outside the university. Generally they are sent outside the country, maybe to some US professor or to some professors in the European universities. And once you get an approval from them, once they say that yes, this person is good enough to be promoted from the rank of assistant professor to associate professor, or from associate professor to a full professor, so then only you get the offer of promotion. And that's how it is. And it almost, I mean, it's a very long process. It does take full 1 year, but this is an ongoing process. Anytime you become eligible, you can file your application, right? So there's no as such issue with that. So that's how, when you miss your chance this time, so you can fill up your application for in the next year. So that's how the the performance appraisal was. Coming back to our discussion before we wind up, now here you can have a quick look at some cultural variations depending upon the different countries. I'll consider just two cases. One is the USA and Japan. Now USA is a low context country or low cultural context, right? Whereas Japan is high context culture and it's very, 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 very formal. US is less formal. So as far as the objectives of performance appraisal are concerned, it's mainly in case of USA, it is fairness and employee development. And similar in Japan also, it is like or as it is needed by the company as per the directive of the advisor. Whereas in case of Japan, in addition to the supervisor, you also have a mentor, right, who has already assigned. So it is the effort, it should be the effort that the appraiser know about the temperament and the skills and thank you. Thank you very much. Right. So I was talking, I mean, these are some of the, a comparison which is done between the three countries, US, Saudi Arabia, and Japan across the different dimensions of performance appraisal. I would request you to go through, and this has been obviously prepared by the researchers. It is already given, the reference is given, right? Generally, praise, like in case of America, it is given individually, whereas in Japan, it is given to the entire group. So it is more about the teams